What happens if local CAMs can't do it? Well, we will jointly support them. As I said, we'll do CoWork. What happens if that's not working? Well, our service will see those children. We work with a lot of kids, mainly in our own right, although we usually touch base with local CAMs and keep them informed. So in York, on that map at the top, we do clinics in Hull, Sheffield, Bradford, Leeds, Liverpool, Manchester, Newcastle, and then some other places we do occasional clinics. And we also go into the residential deaf schools and do clinics there too. So we're trying to get out there and support people who are supporting deaf kids. If that's still not enough, then we do have a national inpatient service in London with 6 beds, and a lot of deaf staff and hearing staff, so kids can go down there and be culturally and linguistically immersed in a therapeutic service. And they will work with us, so if a child from York goes down there, they will work with us on what happens when the child comes back out again, and how do we provide support for that child. What kinds of things are we seeing? We're doing a lot of assessments and care planning. We've had a lot of referrals for autism spectrum assessments from teams around the country, hearing teams around the country that can't make their minds up or are struggling to do the assessment. We've seen lots of kids with depression, isolation, low mood, significant anxiety problems. We've seen a few kids with psychosis, not many. We've seen a lot of kids with complex family issues. We've seen lots of kids with complex communication issues, some kids with language impairment. We do also see, we don't just see profoundly deaf children, we will sometimes see hearing kids with 2 deaf parents, or if the child's problem is related significantly to the deaf kids, we will become involved there too. So we sometimes have some of our staff, deaf staff particularly, getting out supporting deaf parents in helping their children develop, or in helping the parents make better links with the primary school and those kinds of things. We see a lot of kids with significant developmental problems, particularly social and emotional development and behaviour problems. What are we doing to help? We do a lot of consultation. So as I said, the teleconferencing, video conferencing, we do link up with the residential schools and have regular meetings with them. And we go into schools and have consultation meetings. We have, in the clinics, we also always have a consultation slot where anyone can book in just to have a chat about a child. And they can do that in 2 ways. They can do it anonymously, or they can get parental permission and bring the child in for discussion that way and book a specific slot. We also have a lot of interventions and therapies. A lot of that is supporting parents around communication. Sometimes we do things like taste-test. We do deaf awareness work with the family, or we do taste-test BSL sessions, and then help them get the funding to go off and learn BSL, if that's appropriate. We help the parents understand the social and emotional development of their deaf child and the needs of their deaf child. We sometimes do family therapy. We do quite a lot of individual work with kids. We use cognitive behaviour therapy, which is really understanding how emotions, thoughts and behaviour interact, although we have needed to adapt that for deaf children. Our deaf staff do deaf identity work. When we first started, I do remember one boy who thought when he got to 18 he was going to become hearing, for example. So kids have sometimes quite surprising views about themselves and what's going to happen to them. We do a lot of problem-solving work, solution-focused work. Some of the therapists have taken therapies from the hearing world and tried to adapt them. So attachment work to mother and child, or father and child, and dialectic behaviour therapy. Technology is important. We use quite a lot of DVD letters, and we text families to remind them about appointments. Sometimes we'll use Skype or other ways of meeting. We work with teachers and carers and professionals. We do quite a lot of deaf awareness work into schools. The deaf staff go out and train them in groups. When we first started the service, we said, well, we need an advocacy service just in case anybody thinks we're doing a rubbish job, which is really important because you've got to have somewhere to complain. And so the National Deaf Children's Society do that for us, which is your equivalent here. But actually, a lot of the staff have found that we ended up being advocates for the child, because we get a lot of cases where parents want their child to go to one particular school, but they can't get the funding because the local authority says, you know, they have to go to this school because that's the one in the catchment. And the parents are saying, yes, but this is the one that meets their needs. We would usually, we don't get involved politically, and we don't have a particular axe to grind one way or another. We don't take a political stance on how people should do things, but we always focus on the child. What does this individual child need? What are their needs? And we usually spell them out. And sometimes when you spell out their needs, so they're things like, this child has a need for a deaf peer group, it then becomes really clear what the intervention or the school placement ought to be. We use visual therapies. In My Shoes is a computer-based therapy where children can kind of create their own family by dragging and dropping parents, and hundreds of different types of parents you can drag and drop. It enables them, particularly younger children, to talk about their families in a safe way. We sometimes use social stories, which are where you write the child into their own story about themselves. It's an intervention from America by Carol Gray, and they're really mainly designed to help children gain social information. So you're writing social information into the story, but you're also writing them as the child. They're really helpful. We found them really helpful. I've mentioned advocacy. We also need to make sure children don't get lost between services. So we would never say, no, we're not going to see that child, but not do anything else. We would always make sure the child has a service. So we're very interested in care pathways. By care pathways, I mean, if a child has a particular difficulty, where do they go to help them with that difficulty, whatever it may be? And we try and build alliances with local services. We use the family expertise. I think it's really important to recognise that families have got probably a hell of a lot more expertise than we have about their own child, and you can't just stumble in and say, and suddenly know everything about the child and be the expert. So I struggle with the word expert sometimes, because I think maybe my job is to enable other people to be the experts that they are, whether that be family members or other professionals. So we do a lot of work with those other professionals and the third sector, who've developed all sorts of really interesting projects like HealthyDeafMinds in the National Deaf Children's Society. So we will often enable parents to go on their courses. And we talk about the team around the child. So when we get involved, we're always thinking, who are the key people that are going to be able to support this child now and in the future? So our job is to get involved now to sort this particular difficulty out, but it's not just we come on board, everyone else pulls away. I don't know what it's like in this country, but sometimes social services will make a referral to us, and then the next thing you read in the minutes of their next meeting is, and CAMS are involved, so we have withdrawn. Well, we try not to work like that. We try and identify the key people that the child might need around them. We do a piece of work, we identify all the pieces of work that need to be done, and then when we pull out, the team is still there, supporting that child. So an example would be parents and siblings might be part of that process. The teacher, obviously, the teacher of deaf. There may be a communication support worker in school. The social worker may be involved. There may be a learning disability nurse. And then we might have a clinical psychologist and a family support worker involved. And all of those people have a role in a particular difficulty that the child is facing. But at some point we will pull back and leave the rest. I'm going to stop in a minute. I've mentioned training career pathways. We are trying to set up more training for interpreters, for deaf staff, for hearing staff, for internally and externally. We're also trying to improve research, because when we started looking at the research on deaf child mental health, there really isn't very much compared to hearing children. And so we're trying to improve that. So we've just got a Medical Research Council grant to do some work on improving autism assessments in deaf children and adapting the instruments. We did a systematic review of the questionnaires used to screen for autism in deaf children. There's only one study that's ever been published, and that uses an instrument that's terrible. Americans use an instrument called MCHAT with deaf children, and one of the questions on the instrument is, did you ever think your child was deaf? And that scores a point for autism. So it's not a great instrument to use for deaf children. So we want to develop a new one. So we are trying to establish a sort of an international network of interested people, experts with a small e, if you like, so people who've seen deaf kids with autism on a regular basis or worked in a school with deaf kids and autism, because we would like to pick their brains at some point to ask them how, what they think the differences are between hearing autism and deaf autism. So if anybody is interested in that or feels there has that level of knowledge, if you could let me have your email address, if you're happy to be contacted. Very glad to hear from you afterwards. I'm going to stop now because I think you need a cup of tea.